You can say that the Chicago Blackhawks are probably the greatest dynasty in the Cap era, but the Panthers might have something to say about that come this season.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Blackhawks. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank both Locked On Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks listeners for making this your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, the host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. That is Jack Bushman, the host of Locked On Blackhawks and credentialed member of the PGA Tour, joining me on today's show. And we are going to talk dynasty. We are going to look back at the dynasty of the Chicago Blackhawks and also what the Panthers are currently going through right now as they are trying to be they are on the verge of a dynasty. Jack, great to be getting together with you once again on another crossover. And I want to start with this, my friend. Like I said at the beginning, the biggest example of dynasty, even though the Blackhawks had not won 3 in a row, they are, the stretch that they did it in is just as impressive as can be. But I want to start off with this question for you. What do you think what is your true definition of a dynasty? And because I believe that even though the Panthers haven't won a third cup, they're as of right now 2 in a row. I believe they're already there.
Man, that's a very good question right off the jump. Put me on the spot, Armando. I would probably have to go against you a little bit if I'm being honest here with this. I think in order to have a dynasty, you do have to have 3 in probably, man, I don't want to just say 6 because that's when the Blackhawks had it in 2010, 2013, and 2015. I'll say I think you need to at least have 3 in a 7-year stretch. I think every other year in that longevity, I think, is pretty sustained. I feel like, though, at the same point in time, just because it's such rarefied air to even win 2 championships in a row like the Florida Panthers did, or to see the Blackhawks win 3 times in 6 years, I feel like it's hard to just put your finger down and be like, this is a dynasty and this isn't. But I do feel like that 3rd championship is really what separates like a special run of a core for a couple of years and what really puts it in that dynasty era. So it's a tough question right off the jump. Obviously, Florida has been right knocking on the door, but I think without that 3rd championship, Armando, me personally, it's hard to call it a dynasty.
Yeah, and that's why it's a debate to begin with. And obviously, if the Panthers do end up getting that 3rd one, the debate will officially be over. I mean, Pittsburgh got 3 in 8 years, so I would argue that they're also a dynasty for what they did in 2009 and then winning in 16 and 17. But both of these teams had in common is that they both had to lose before winning. I mean, you think of when both Paul Maurice and Joel Quenneville were hired right off the jump, they were successful. Joel Quenneville makes it to a Western Conference final. They ultimately lose to the Western Conference champion Detroit Red Wings there. Obviously, the Blackhawks did eventually get revenge on them, but the Panthers broke through that door after winning the President's Trophy, and then once Paul Maurice came into the mix, they've been in the Stanley Cup final every single year. Obviously, they make the move for Matthew Tkachuk. We'll discuss that a little bit of that later in the segment. But it's also what's also impressive about the Blackhawks is what they've done in the years that they didn't win and who they lost to as well. 2011 Western Conference representative Vancouver Canucks, Western Conference representative in the Arizona Coyotes as well, and also the Stanley Cup champion LA Kings in that Western Conference final in 2014. So I think of in that stretch about what they did, what Chicago did outside of those years, and even for Florida, getting over the hump of that, finally winning that in a round for the first time in 26 years, and then blowing the door after that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up, Armando, because I think as a collective, it really can be beneficial. Obviously, you don't feel this way at the time because losing absolutely sucks and it stings, but having that feeling as a group, and I think kind of realizing together that, hey, we know we're better than this and we never want to feel like this again. That's, a big motivating factor, I feel like, for a lot of these teams. And the Blackhawks losing to their rival Detroit Red Wings in 2009 in 5 games in the Western Conference Final. I can think back to 12, 13-year-old me being absolutely crushed. And I'm sure the guys in the locker room, the youngsters, I mean, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, they were like 20, 21 years old at that point in time. I'm sure it killed them to have lost in that fashion to such a bitter rival. But I do think that's what made them stronger and fueled them and motivated them to get back. And they wind up winning the Stanley Cup then in 2010. And then you even referenced 2011. It was an epic battle with the Vancouver Canucks, which was a team the Blackhawks had faced in the Stanley Cup playoffs in both 2009 and 2010. So there was a big rivalry there. The Blackhawks came back from down 3-0 in that series to force a Game 7 and then wind up getting their hearts broken by that scumbag Alexander Burrows in overtime. Hair-pulling Alexander Burrows.
Big save by Luongo on Patrick Sharp.
Oh, hurts. It hurts, man. But those moments, like I said, Armando, I think that's what binds a team even closer together, and suffering those heartbreaks really just brings a room together and makes them very tight-knit. And I think, that definitely fueled the Blackhawks to get to those moments once again and do better the next time in 2013 and 2015.
Yeah, and also what these two teams have in common is just the example of a captain who is who is an example of playing defense. I mean, Jonathan Toews, a Selke winner. Alexander Barkov now has won it 3 times, and then also a sniper, a guy who could score at will. Patrick Kane, Sam Reinhart in the Florida Panthers example here. But it's just also about the ability to draft the core. And also, the Panthers haven't really been able to hit on draft picks outside of round 1. They've been mostly using those picks as far as getting their pieces together. Brandon Montour, Sam Bennett, for example. But I look at what Dale Talon did and the Blackhawks front office before Stan Bowman got there, drafting Kane, Toews, Seabrook years earlier, but also what they did in later rounds. Corey Crawford, Duncan Keith in round 2, although Crawford wasn't the goaltender until after the first one, but still hitting on those late picks as well has been absolutely key. But also, Panthers have been on the F them picks motto since 2022, and their next one isn't until 2028. But I'm looking at the Chicago Blackhawks example, and 2 firsts in 2011, 1 in 2012, 1 in 13, 14, of which they traded up with San Jose, and then finally the pick that they traded for in 2015 was the one that they traded for Anton Vermette. So that's also how impressive that is. Although not every single pick has hit, the only really impactful one has been Teuvo Teravainen for the Blackhawks. That's still impressive that you didn't have to kill the farm at the time.
Yeah, honestly, it was crazy to think that we weren't really wheeling and dealing all that much at the deadlines for that first Stanley Cup team at the very least. It was really just that young core that was kind of coming up together. And sure, you had a couple of veterans there like a Patrick Sharp who was a little bit older, so on and so forth. But it was just a lot of homegrown talent on that first Blackhawks Stanley Cup team. And I think that's what made it really cool. And also, I bet a lot of your Florida Panthers viewers or listeners, Armando, probably have never seen Blackhawks TV, which was a thing when like YouTube first was popular on the internet, like back in the middle 2000s. But the Blackhawks had this thing called Blackhawks TV, and it would just be like following guys on the road, and you got to see just a lot of different faces. And as a fan, it was easy to connect with a lot of those guys. And it was just such a unique group where they didn't really have to go pry from other teams and sell some of those picks like you alluded to. It was really just that homegrown talent, and goes to show how well they drafted in those couple of years prior to that great run. Like you said, like drafting Duncan Keith in the second round, Corey Crawford later on, Nicholas Hjalmarsson was a later selection. And those guys proving to be value pieces was probably, not as on the forefront as Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews leading them to victory, but they were just as crucial in getting the team to the Stanley Cup. As you know, Armando, you don't win the Stanley Cup with just a couple of guys. It takes a full team, and that's what really made that early Blackhawks team special.
Yeah, and then in other examples of the Blackhawks having other first-round picks that didn't end up working, like Jack Skilly, Dylan Olesen, and then for the Panthers in their example, I mean, Henrik Borgstrom, who ended up being traded to Chicago as far as trying to clear Brett Connolly's contract as well. And then obviously the Panthers tried being Blackhawks South for a little bit, having Brian Campbell, Dave Bolin, Chris Versteeg, Jimmy Hayes, all of them. So it's like the connections there are crazy. But hey, you try to at least get some of those guys at least to teach the younger Jonathan Huberdeau's, Alexander Barkov's, Aaron Ekblad's there. But Brian Campbell was such a big piece for trying to at least help Aaron Ekblad as trying to of how to be a pro. So honestly, truly thankful for that for when he made that trade. And I know this isn't Locked On Devils, but trading for Jaromir Jagr, teaching the ways for Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau. So that was definitely a big trade as far as like helping them grow up. But we got a lot more to get to on this edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. We're going to discuss impact free agent signings, whether big names, and also the low risk, high reward names for these two teams. We're going to discuss that more next here on this crossover of Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Panthers. But first, we're going to tell you guys all about FanDuel. And the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Although this recording is coming out after the Cowboys and Eagles matchup, we are recording this prior to the game. If you want to place your bets in on the Eagles repeating as Super Bowl champions, you can do that once again on FanDuel. If you think that Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears, who play on Monday Night Football, although their chances are low of winning the division to overtake the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, you could do that once again on FanDuel. The Dolphins, not very optimistic about them, but you could get definitely some big winnings to win the AFC East. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Segment 2 on this crossover edition between the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. Armando Velez here with Jack Bushman. Thank you once again for making both of our podcasts your first listen of the day. So we are going to discuss the cap, how the Panthers and the Blackhawks have been able to manage with losing guys, and that of course it comes at the price of winning. But like I have on my episode title, compare and contrast. There's a lot of contrast when it comes to the cap part, but let's talk about the impact signings. I mean, two signings that both these franchises made of guys who were probably already Hall of Famers before they signed with these respective teams. Marian Hossa played with Ottawa, played with Atlanta, but was looking for that Stanley Cup, defeated the Chicago Blackhawks, and then ended up joining them. Sergei Bobrovsky, I mean, doubted in Philadelphia. They decided to go with Ilya Bryzgalov after, and then had a run with Columbus. They weren't going to pay him. They weren't going to pay him, nor former Blackhawk Artemi Panarin there. And then 2 cups for Sergei Bobrovsky, 3 cups for Marian Hossa and the Chicago Blackhawks, but also the low risk signings, an undrafted Brandon Saad coming into the mix for the Chicago Blackhawks, and one who, if Brandon Saad were in his younger, he would fit so much in this Florida Panthers system. A young Brandon Saad. I think of also Mason Marchment, something that I've talked a whole lot about, and also Gustav Forsling, claiming him off waivers. Former Blackhawk Gustav Forsling, another connection there. But I want you to talk about how impactful that signing was when Marian Hossa came to Chicago.
Oh my goodness. I still think it's the greatest contract signing in Chicago sports. I mean, Marian Hossa was the game changer for the Blackhawks, and I know I've talked a couple of different times already about my younger self and how excited I was back in those days. I will never forget, Mondo, being in my apartment that summer and watching Marian Hossa highlights non-stop on YouTube, watching him tear it up in his old days with the Atlanta Thrashers, scoring 40 goals with them. Obviously a terrific goal scorer for both the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Detroit Red Wings. And in that year prior, when he was with Detroit and was on the wrong end of the Stanley Cup final for the second consecutive year, that entire season he was with the Red Wings, he was torching the Blackhawks. I mean, torching them. He had a shootout winner. I want to say it was actually Halloween night earlier on in that season. Was big for them in that Western Conference final run as well. And to go and get that guy after killing us that previous season, it took my excitement truly to another level. And Marian Hossa's game took the Blackhawks to another level, not only because of how he went about his business on the ice, Armando, but also just because he was a consummate professional. And I think he fit right in with someone like Jonathan Toews, who was super serious, all business, and worked his butt off on the ice to maximize his skill and maximize his potential. And to pair those two guys up with one another on the top line, you just knew what you were getting on a nightly basis. And that was the best defensive forward line in the game, and a line that can also go and put up a goal or two every single night. And you mentioned Brandon Saad just a couple of moments ago as well. In 2015, that was the Blackhawks top line: Brandon Saad, Jonathan Toews, and Marian Hossa. And all three of them absolutely played the game the same way. Workhorses down low along the boards, winning every single puck battle, and then not letting you do anything on the other side of the ice. So yeah, those both were two huge additions. Marian Hossa, obviously a different level, though, as a Hockey Hall of Famer. His jersey has been retired by the Blackhawks, which I was fortunate enough to be in attendance that night. I know we'll talk a little bit more about jersey retirements here in segment 3, but that Marian Hossa signing, the Blackhawks could not have kept that dynasty going the way it was without Marian Hossa. He was absolutely crucial, and man, one of the greatest Blackhawks ever, even if he was only here for 6 or 7 seasons.
Yeah, and you think about just the defensive forward lines that are just set the example. I mean, right now for the Florida Panthers, it's Barkov and Reinhart who are guys who are together on the penalty kill, and obviously a young Anton Lundell is also part of that mix. Him and Brad Marchand, who we talked about, the Panthers giving a lot of their picks for him. So yeah, you were saying something?
Sorry to interrupt you there, but guys who just go about their business the right way and also provide for you on the offensive side of things. I know there's obviously, with these two franchises being 10 years apart from their dynasty runs or whatnot, there's not going to be a ton of similarities, but that is one that I notice immediately, Armando. It's you mentioned Alexander Barkov as the captain along with Jonathan Toews, just a guy who leads by example. You know what you're going to get out of him consistency wise every single day. And then also pieces, high level pieces who are around them that are making impacts everywhere. That's the similarity I see between the Blackhawks and the Florida Panthers. It's fast, it's in your face, it's aggressive, and it's demanding and never stopping. That's the comparison I see between these teams.
Yeah, especially with how the Panthers did it in Game 6, where it's like the Edmonton Oilers just had nothing left, and the Panthers we're not going to only just we're not only just going to beat you, we're going to beat you, and we're going to beat you up. And they also did that in Game 3 in the fight with Jonah Gadjevich as well. Yeah. So that was definitely some theater. But it's also, before we transition to segment 3, just of how the cap management and obviously the state of the cap was a lot different from them. I actually looked it up before recording. The cap went from 56.8 million to 71.4 to 2015. We're going to see double. We're going to see more of that in the next 2 seasons. So I'm like, wow. Stan Bowman definitely had a little bit of a harder time trying to keep guys together. There's the compliance buyout of Rostislav Olez. There was also having to trade Dustin Byfuglien after the first Stanley Cup as well. Unfortunately, losing Brandon Saad after they won in 2015 to the Columbus Blue Jackets, signing his big ticket deal after that. But for the Panthers, it wasn't necessarily all the same then. They traded Anthony Duclair to bring a little bit more of a fourth line piece in Stephen Lawrence. 2024 was more guys losing in free agency. And 2025, it's more like for the Panthers, it's like not if, but when it happens, when Matthew Tkachuk does get healthy and he's good enough to go. So right now the Panthers are kind of dealing with that, but hey, with the cap, they're trying to squeeze. And also, both these teams benefited from LTIR, 2015 Blackhawks and 2025 Panthers.
I have to give a shout out because Patrick Kane broke his collarbone against the Florida Panthers. Shout out to was it Alexander or Alec Petrovic?
Alex Petrovic.
Yeah, he broke Patty Kane's collarbone along the boards. He got to go on LTIR. We got to acquire Antoine Vermette because, obviously didn't have to be cap compliant, which is now changing in the NHL moving forward. So that was definitely a big one for the Blackhawks in 2015 because we were in salary cap hell for a while there, Armando. And Antoine Vermette was monstrous in the 2015 Stanley Cup playoff run, especially in that Stanley Cup final against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, he was awesome. So to get that little bit of luck definitely helped the Blackhawks get that third Stanley Cup title. But just kind of looking back from those days, the Blackhawks lost a lot of pieces after those first couple Stanley Cup runs. You mentioned Dustin Byfuglien. We had to trade Brian Bickle. Andrew Ladd was a key piece. Chris Versteeg. There was a lot of
Panther
guys.
Chris Versteeg.
Yes, exactly. There were a lot of guys. Dave Boland, unfortunately. Like, there were a lot of guys that we had to part ways with because we just ultimately couldn't afford them. The Panthers, it feels like, obviously are in a little bit of a more beneficial situation just because of the salary cap rising so much over these next couple of seasons, where obviously in a couple of years down the road, it's just what's going to happen, Armando. I don't think I'm surprising you here. You're going to lose some guys. That's just the reality of it, but it's not happening, I don't think, as immediately as it did to the Blackhawks because we're seeing such an exponential rise, and it's going to continue to happen for a couple of years.
Yeah, and that Dave Boland signing for the Panthers, it costed them Lawson Crouse, their first-round pick, due to his inability to stay on the ice. It's crazy. You mentioned Alex Petrovic. He scored his first goal in the playoffs in almost 10 years. The last one came on April 20th, 2016, which was the game winner in Game 4 against the New York Islanders when the Panthers were trying to where Luongo stood on his head during that series, but they just couldn't find a way to get in on the scoring. Alexander Barkov misses a shootout, a penalty shot, and that is definitely a big game changer. And obviously, for the Panther fans, hashtag Trocheck was tripped. But we're going to flip over to segment number 3, and we are going to discuss adversity and turning points when it comes to both of these Stanley Cup runs for both the Florida Panthers and the Chicago Blackhawks respectively. We're going to discuss that more next here on this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. Segment number 3 here on this crossover between Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. Armando Velez, Jack Bushman here. Thank you once again for making both of our Locked On podcasts your first listen of the day. And yeah, every championship comes with some type of adversity, some doubts at points, and turning points. It's crazy. Every single run for the Panthers came at different points. And the biggest one is every single time for the Panthers have been overtime winners. It's crazy because from 2016 to 2024, the Panthers had a streak of double-digit consecutive games where they won in overtime before that streak came to an end against the New York Rangers in the Eastern Conference Final in 2024. I think they went 11 straight overtime games without losing, which you think of for the Panthers in 2023. Carter Verhaeghe against the President's Trophy Boston Bruins, the record-setting Boston Bruins. That was the turning point of the Panthers franchise, even though they didn't win the cup that year. 2024, Sam Reinhart, right off the crossbar and in overtime, because I will say the Panthers, that series against the Rangers should have been a 5-game series because their Corsi for percentage was way in their direction. Igor Shesterkin was standing on his head. And for the Panthers to think 2-0 against Toronto this past season and then 3-1, Brad Marchand comes to the rescue, a goal that deflects off a Leafs player and into the net. And Anton Lundell, funny enough, during the European Player Tour in Milan, spoke about how they knew that was the point that they were extremely confident that they could find a way to win the series. So I know this is a big stretch for the Blackhawks, the 3 and 6 years, but discuss some of the turning points that you got to witness.
I don't know if I would call these first 2 turning points, but I think they were huge learning lessons for a very young Blackhawks team. The first one that comes to mind, Armando, was back in that, golly, it was either the 2008-2009 season where they lost in the Western Conference Final to Detroit, or it was 2009 at 2010 when they won their first Stanley Cup. Honestly, the year doesn't really matter that much because the point is just it was a very young group. But I remember one game in particular against the Calgary Flames. The Blackhawks were down 5-0 in that game, and they came back and won 6-5. And listen, it was just a regular season game, picking up 2 points, just like any victory. But I think with that young of a team, it let them know that they were never down and out. They could go and do it. They could come back against any sort of deficit. And a year later, or that same season, they went on to win their first Stanley Cup. I think another learning lesson along the way was that 2011 Game 7 against the Vancouver Canucks, where they had clawed back from down 3-0 in that series. They had fought to force overtime in Game 7. Jonathan Toews scored one of my favorite Blackhawks goals ever. Blackhawks down 2-1 with 2.5 minutes left in Game 7 in regulation, and they're shorthanded, and Jonathan Toews scores the game-tying goal to force overtime. Now, they did go on to lose that game, but I still felt like that group knew what they were capable of from that very moment. They probably, didn't execute well enough in those first 3 games to fall down 3-0, but I think that also told them that they just have something special here, and even though it wasn't their year, there is going to be better days for them moving forward. But undoubtedly, Armando, the real turning point of the franchise was that series against the Detroit Red Wings in 2013, because the previous 2 years, the Blackhawks have been knocked out fairly early in the Stanley Cup playoffs after winning their first Stanley Cup title. And not only just that Game 7 alone, but that entire Game 5, 6, and 7 backs up against the wall when it was still a huge rivalry between the Blackhawks and Red Wings. I mean, there was no love lost between those two cities and those franchises. And for the Blackhawks to fight together as a unit, win Game 5, win a big Game 6 in Detroit as well. Michael Frolik, epic penalty shot goal. I still believe Pavel Datsyuk spit at him when he was going to give fists by the benches. There's a gif of it. I'll send it to you. And then Game 7, of course. I think the real turning point, of course, Brent Seabrook's goal is the one that will get remembered, but what also happened in the final 2 minutes of regulation in that game was Nicholas Jarmelson put the Blackhawks ahead 2-1 with under 2 minutes to play. The United Center erupts, but the refs blow it off because behind the play, Brandon Saad, literally in the neutral zone, maybe even back in Detroit's end, they were tussling behind the play and the refs blew it dead. So the United Center is going bonkers. Nicholas Jarmelson slamming his stick against the bench. Everyone's pissed off. If the Blackhawks go on to lose that game, it is going to be, I'm not going to say what happened to Vancouver in 2010 is what would have happened to Chicago, but there would have been some angry people outside of the United Center, and I couldn't have imagined the feeling inside that Blackhawks dressing room of coming back from down 3-1. You think you have the game winner with under 2 minutes to play, and then you go and lose in overtime. So for them to go and not even have to worry about that, for Brent Seabrook to get the winner and to look up into the stands and start yelling, that was the turning point for sure of the Blackhawks, solidifying that they were for real, that they had just came back against a powerhouse Detroit team that was in the midst of that epic consecutive Stanley Cup playoff streak that they were on, right?
22 years.
This really cemented the Blackhawks as the real deal, not just a one-trick pony that won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. This solidified them that they were a force to be reckoned with in this league.
So you're saying you're not here for the riots?
No. I'm not here for the riots, and I'm glad we didn't have to see them.
No, I could add 2 more for the Panthers. One that was like a lesson of this is not how you play. When the Panthers were down 3-0 in Game 5 in 2022 against Washington, Patrick Hornquist has the slowest breakaway I'd ever seen in my life, and he finds a way to score a goal against Ilya Samsonov. Panthers end up winning that series. Carter Verhaeghe has 2 overtime winners there, but also Brandon Montour's goal with less than a minute left, the 6-on-5 to force overtime in that Game 7, which ended up Carter Verhaeghe sending them to round 2, where they ended up defeating Toronto and then Carolina there. But both of these teams have Panthers also dealt with their fair share of injuries with Montour and Ekblad, which their injuries started in round 1 of 2023. Bennett took a shot off the wrist. Lomberg got sick. And it's crazy. The Panthers, health was wealth in 2024. And 15 skaters played all 24 playoff games. So I'm like, wow. I had to look that back up. I'm like, wow. For the most part, the Panthers were in a good spot with the exception of Bennett and Lomberg. 2025 was a little bit harder when it came to the injury situation. Sam Reinhart, Aaron Ekblad had 2 suspensions. Evan Rodriguez was hobbled in that Toronto series. So they've found a way to rebound there as well. So yeah, I'm sure that Chicago went through their fair share during their runs.
Yeah, honestly, the big dogs stayed healthy for the most part. I know there was one postseason where Patrick Sharp was banged up and he wasn't at his best, but Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Brent Seabrook, listen, it's Stanley Cup playoff hockey.
Yeah.
People are going to be dealing with things, right? But that's a huge part of it as well. Is you need some luck, you need some fortuitousness, right, in order to win that many championships in such a short time frame. Like the Blackhawks were pretty lucky on that side of things, looking back on it, and honestly might have been something that I took for granted a little bit in the time.
Yeah, and Matthew Tkachuk also getting hurt in Game 3 against Vegas and tried giving it a go in Game 4. Although even if with a healthy Matthew Tkachuk, I always say this, the Panthers were not defeating the Vegas Golden Knights in 2023, and then obviously getting that injury in 4 Nations, and then, hey, it ended up working to the Panthers' benefit. And crazy, even though Sam Reinhart scored 4 goals, Matthew Tkachuk got the GWG in Game 6
Yes,
in 2025. So that will be something added to his stats. But one last thing before we get out of here, it's crazy because right now, obviously, the Chicago Blackhawks aren't necessarily winning right now. This is what happens when you compete for so many years, starting to rebuild the farm, which right now the Chicago Blackhawks are ranked number 2 in as far as best farm. Right now, the Panthers are 29th. This is according to The Athletic. But you're starting to see the fruits of the labor right now. As of right now, only one of the that dynasty run is currently has their jersey retired. Obviously, more to come. I'm expecting Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Brent Seabrook likely up there. For the Panthers, I could add maybe as much as far as minimum 5. Ekblad, Barkov, Bobrovsky, Forsling, and Reinhart. Still a few guys up for debate, but how exciting is it that in the coming years the Blackhawks are seeing those other numbers go to the rafters? I know Toews and Kane are still in the league.
Oh, dude. When that time comes for you, it's going to pull on your heartstrings a little bit.
Yeah,
when I was at the UC for Marian Hosses, man, he was getting emotional on the ice. They actually had like all the Blackhawks greats of those dynasty teams up there with him, like Kane, Toews, Nicholas Hjalmarsson, Patrick Sharp, a lot of the guys who had won all 3 of those Stanley Cups together. And man, it was emotional, man. It was crazy, but super cool that Marian got that opportunity to, come back to the city of Chicago, and the Chicago faithful got to show him all the support, and it's never going to be due for what he gave us in return. But man, it was a really cool night, and I'm excited to be having more of those in the future for sure. The Blackhawks, they actually laid out, I don't know if you saw this, Armando, but about a year and a half ago, they laid out guidelines for how you can get your number retired by the Blackhawks, because there's been such a debate among Blackhawks fans in terms of who of these core guys are actually going to get their numbers retired. So the Blackhawks, they laid out a guideline and a standard of what you need to have. So you need to be at least 3 years retired from the NHL. So we're not going to be seeing Patrick Kane or Jonathan Toews. Those are going to still be, 4 or 5 years down the road. Brent Seabrook's officially retired now because his contract finally came off of the books for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So he's still a couple of years away. I'd have to guess Duncan Keith. I think he's off the Oilers books now, isn't he?
Yeah, I believe so. But he just actually recently got he's going to be inducted later this year in the Hockey Hall of Fame. So
yes,
yeah.
So he's probably the next one. I think would be Duncan Keith. Well, Chris Chelios, obviously gets his night. But from this Blackhawks team, it's going to be Toews, Kane, Seabrook, and Toews, Kane, Seabrook, and Keith are the 4 that are for sure going to get it. It's just when the time comes, because the Blackhawks laid out those guidelines. I don't really think anyone else from that core is going to get it. And I do wonder, if they were ever going to put up like a banner to, show some respect to some of those guys, but they actually have announced they're doing a Blackhawks Hall of Fame at this new at the new practice facility that they're going to be establishing in Chicago that they're creating. So I think that's the way that they're kind of gonna kind of honor the guys who are right there on the bubble. Probably don't deserve it, but obviously they hold a soft spot in all of our hearts for what they did for the franchise. But that core four, I think, is who we're going to be looking at here next, but it's probably going to be a couple of years for all of them because of the guidelines the Blackhawks laid out. But what are you thinking for Florida? Who do you think's got it cemented, and who do you think's kind of on the cuff? Obviously, we're still short into this dynasty. There could be more years to come from this great squad.
Yeah, just listed them: Ekblad, Barkov, Bobrovsky, Forsling, Reinhart. Up for debate is still Verhaeghe, Bennett. I don't think that Kulikov is number will be, but I think if they do a Ring of Honor that he'll be added there. So but hey, he's a guy who was a first round pick for the Panthers and then came back and won a cup, even though he didn't necessarily live up to his his draft stock. So I think that's still a great story, at least find a way to honor Dmitry Kulikov. And also he signed a 4-year contract at 1.15. So he's going to be mentoring a 6 or 7 defenseman in the next few years as well. So that's also a bit he loves South Florida. He never wanted to leave after that 2016 playoff where he eventually was traded after that year. So we will see. And honestly, my 40-year-old self is going to be really happy when I see those numbers go into the rafters. I got to see it Roberto Luongo as a 20-year-old. Even though I didn't start watching him until his second stint with the Panthers, but now the Stanley Cup runs, I wonder if the Panthers are going to put that same thing as far as guidelines. So we will see. That's going to be interesting if they follow suit of what the Chicago Blackhawks did. But Jack, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this crossover edition of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work online, my friend.
Armando, always great talking hockey with you, my friend. Excited to be doing it again pretty soon, as of course the Blackhawks and the Panthers are duking it out at 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the season opener on Tuesday, October 7th, which is very interesting, but we'll have it covered. Greatly appreciate you having me on the show. To anyone for the Florida Panthers side of things who wants to check me out, you can find Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and go and check out Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well for any updates ahead of that season opener. Last thing I want to add here real quick, Armando, Roberto Luongo beating that drum on Game 6. And I mean, put a banner of that up. Someone needs to make a GIF of that. That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Yeah, it still gives me goosebumps just think about doing for Game 7 the year before. There was only one person and one person only worthy of that. So yeah, can't wait if that situation happens again for him to do it. But anyone on the Blackhawks feed, you can follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account anywhere you listen to podcasts, and can't wait to get back together with you on another crossover in just over a month. So my friend, see you very soon.
Looking forward to it, Armando. I'll see you next time, buddy.